It's a real pleasure to be asked to talk about a project which is really at the prototype stage to a group of people who are obviously, very, very focused on issues around housing. HUTEC is really about rethinking home. It's not just about a particular type of building or smart home. So I just wanted to just kick off by saying exactly that, really. The context for today is that I think, most of us would probably agree that we're standing on the threshold. We're in a very kind of liminal period where old stories are beginning to be challenged and are falling away, and there's something new emerging. And really, I think it's, the way I feel about it is it's a chance to think, well, are we going to practically build those new stories? Or are we, as enablers, going to enable other people to practically build them? But either way, there's something really big happening, and we are in that liminal period, which is exciting and very challenging. I don't know how many of you have read Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens. It's supposed to be a major bestseller, and he's just come out with Homo Deus, but absolutely inspiring books. And the very first, that's a quote from Yuval, I encourage everyone to question the basic narratives of the world, to connect past developments with present concerns and not be afraid of controversial issues. And when we talk about housing, that really rings true to me. If you look at the great injustices that have been done in terms of land ownership, land distribution, it goes back thousands of years, but we still live with that massive inequality. And that, more than anything, I think, is the concern that we should focus on. Not so much as what we build and what we live in, that's all very exciting, but where can we live and where can we build? So HUTEC is aimed at building something that's aspirational, small, modular, lightweight, affordable, and can be easily built and unbuilt anywhere. But it's also, what we're aiming to do is to help create that new narrative. And what we design with HUTEC as a small home solution, we really do want it to complement and support the people who are living the new stories, the emergent new paradigm into existence. Just a little bit about me. Groundhouse, Earthships, that's really where I kind of got into this whole, the whole kind of housing area. I feel very passionate about it. A lot of effort's gone into it. That's the Brittany Groundhouse that some of you might have seen on Grand Designs, which was my own home for a while. We've done other Earthships in the UK. Misha's here. We've done lots of stuff together, ongoing projects, but unfortunately none of them scalable. This is Sam, who I'm working with on HUTEC, sitting in one of his small homes. He's an amazing designer. I met him last October. He produces the most amazing small homes, all bespoke. He probably does 5 or 6 a year. That is his entire business. We had a real synergy where we basically both realized that there's no scalability. He can do 6 a year Earthships. I mean, how many have we done, Misha, in the last 15 years, 20 years since we started it? Probably half a dozen as well. So there's no scalability when we have a housing crisis. That kind of jars a little bit, and both Sam and myself are on the same page on that. So the HUTEC design, we're trying to revision what's aspirational in terms of small homes. It's got to be pop up, pop down. We're trying to build in massive flexibility so that the HUTEC, as a lightweight and modular building, can go into a situation where we can easily claim that it's temporary. That might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might be 2 months. So it's really designed to be something that could be used instantly, could be put up in a weekend, but could be taken down in a weekend. Ecological, affordable, lots of great design principles. We've worked on this. We're at the point where we've cracked the design, which is great. This is just showing the life cycle of HUTEC. Basically, you configure it. You get a quote from a CNC cutter because it's all made from high-grade plywood. So it's configured and twisted to what you actually need in terms of modular size, but also design. You get a quote from the CNC cutter. It all gets cut out. The panels get assembled. You build it and you move in. So the idea is that it's super simple and affordable. These are just some quick sketches through the panels. The design, we've spent months trying to crack this issue of design for disassembly, using cheap, and affordability. And I think we finally got there. I haven't got time to go into the detail on how this works, but suffice to say that having nearly thrown in the towel 2 or 3 times since October, Sam feels, and from what I can understand about what he's explained to me, that we've cracked it. So now we just need to build the prototypes. That's pretty much what they would look like. There's probably some scaling issues with the woman there, but the idea is that it's scalable. That's the beauty of it. I've launched the idea at the B Corp hackathon back in October, which was where I decided to really go out and find somebody like Sam. What was nice about it was that there I was talking to a business community, an ethical business community, about small homes, about radical small homes. What was amazing was how many professionals who were earning 40 or 50K who were in that room who absolutely resonated with it. And at the hackathon, what we did was we put teams together from these different businesses to hack how we could do these different projects. And HUTEC, which I just kind of threw into the mix, was selected. So for 2 days, a team worked on it. And what was amazing was that this diverse bunch of business people all got it, and they were like, we want one. This is actually the future. We don't need these big houses. We're trying to hit a kind of 5 to 10K price point. This is not for a finished build. This is self-build. It's DIY. But that's the kind of aspiration, and we're pretty confident we can get there. And again, I can't emphasize enough, it's pop up and pop down. So, I'd ask you to think about how that could benefit your projects, perhaps as something that you can get into and build community within a weekend. And the idea is that it can go anywhere because it's modular and all the panels are lightweight. It can go through a house into a back garden space. It can go up a mountain into a woodland. It can go on a roof of a house in Brighton. It can go into MeanwhileSpace. MeanwhileSpace is actually the thing that at the hackathon everybody got super excited about. So it's a kind of all-terrain home in a way. Why small? There's hardly any time probably to go through the absolutely amazing small home movement, the tiny house movement. But suffice to say, here's a few questions for you. Which of these statements is true or false? And if anyone can tell me who the quotation is from on the top, I'd be quite interested. How many of you have seen Garbage Warrior, Ollie's film? 4 people. Okay, well, there's a big clue. It's just a quote that I always remember from the film where Mike Reynolds says, the American dream's in the toilet. We've got to do things differently. I don't think there's any question about that. The aspirational home, the big, the American dream home is definitely in the toilet. It's still being replicated globally. If you go to Dubai, that is the model that everyone has been pushed and that everybody wants. But I think the tiny house movement is absolutely thriving. It's an architectural and social movement that advocates living simply in small homes. And it is on fire, absolutely on fire. There are pioneers. This is, that was a definition actually by Marjolian, who's a pioneer in the Netherlands. It is just simply about a conscious choice to kind of downsize to an extreme and live in a simple home. That is her home in the Netherlands. You've got people like Dee Williams. She's a pioneer. She was inspired by Jay Schaefer, who's the kind of one of the founders of the American DIY tiny house movement. This home that she's in, she built for under 8K. A lot of it was salvaged. She's done a book, The Big Tiny, featured in the New York Times. And she runs PAD, which is all about, this is the inside of her tiny home. What's amazing is, if you go on YouTube and you look at the videos that people like Kirsten Dirksen are producing, she's got 300 million views on her tiny house films. She's got 750,000 subscribers to her channel. It absolutely resonates at such an extreme scale. It's so vibrant. That's our Dee's house in the garden there. It's on a trailer. A lot of the American tiny homes are built on trailers. Thousands of people are doing it, and they have an issue with regulation and code, which means you can't live in a house that's under a certain size, because you have to go for the American dream of the big house. So they have to put it on wheels in many cases to meet the building codes. One of the things I like about this slide from Dee's website, Pad, which is where she helps other people do the small homes. What if you could build the life you dream? I love the fact that it's all the animals around there, because it's a point that I hope to finish on if I get there, if we've got time. But it's that whole thing about what is your nature, what is the kind of intuition that guides you, and what's your nature, and looking at a thing like that, it's like we're all different characters, and by enabling our natures, our true natures, then I think we can make a lot more progress. And so that slide really resonates with me, actually. Let's just spin through just some. I mean, it is so rich and so diverse. I'd encourage you, if anyone's interested in the reality of small homes at the moment, just Google it. You'll never get out of that rabbit hole. But here's one. That's an £8,000 arch cabin. It's mainly metal. Can be put together in 3 days. People are living in them. This is a Devon solution, Black Dog Carpentry. This is on a trailer. A bit pricey, around 25,000, but it's a turnkey trailer solution. You literally hitch it up and take it away. Obviously, you've got to pay for it. It's absolutely stunning. You've got a big double bed up in the top, fantastic tailor-made fitted kitchen. It's all glazed at the other end, beautiful wood burner, absolutely lovely. Double dom, these are just all things that just caught my eye. I mean, you can go on and on and on. So here's another modular small home starting at 10K. Again, people living in them in the States. I had to put this in. I knew Misha would be here, and I knew he'd appreciate this. DIY kits to do kind of like micro earthships. Apparently around 3K for a 25 meter squared model shell. And, again, these are actually, Green Magic homes. I don't know anything about them, but it's a DIY kind of small, permanent, obviously, earth-sheltered home, similar to what we've worked. No, a lot of these are American. Christy Wolfe, Hobbit House. This, I don't know how this was. Oh, Kirsten Dirksen did a short film on her YouTube channel about this lady. She built this for under 10K. It's a little bit large in terms of what is normally a small home, and it's obviously very permanent. What I loved about this was that she built this for 10K, and it's a pretty heavyweight building. What I also loved about it was that I noticed in the web link to the film that she was renting it out on Airbnb. So I went and looked at the Airbnb listing, which was booked out for a year in advance at £170 a night, which means that she's obviously living the life of doing a lot of traveling. Just to take that back to someone who is genuinely living the life, this is Jan's place in Melinek. It's close. It's about 5Ks from the Brittany Groundhouse. So this is where we lived in central Brittany. It's part of the Wild West, no question in terms of France. Jan built this for under 25 grand. Again, it's a little bit large. It's a small home, but it's not a tiny home. This was a compulsory build. This contract, everyone thinks of France as being really kind of hard to do anything and red tape. Here's a situation. Jan and Jackie, I met them 15 years ago when they turned up in their roulotte, which is a horse-drawn tiny home. They met a guy in the bar. They were busking. They met a guy in the bar and they said, we really want to buy a bit of land. This guy said, I've just inherited some. I don't want it. Come and have a look. It is the most beautiful site that I've ever seen anywhere. It's on the side of this beautiful valley, about 5 acres. They bought the land, they parked up on it, and they started doing stuff with the land. Really productive, really smart, regenerative agriculture. They got on with it. After about 8 years, after about 5 years, the gendarme came round, said, you don't have a permit to live here. This is outside the village boundary, a little village of 5 houses. You have to go and see the mairie. You have to build a house. So basically, they had to put in for a permis de construire, they had to put in for a CU, Certificate to Urbanism. They were forced, and they said, we don't want to do it. We're happy living here, but no. So they were forced to build this micro Earthship. They spent 15 years building it. They just didn't want to build it. They literally, every year I went back, every year I've caught up with them. We've been having a beer on like, a 3-story high wall, and it just went up and up. Finally, last year, they just had to finish it and move in. And they love it. And they're glad that they were forced to build a permanent house on a greenfield site because it was the right thing to do.
Is it modular?
No, it's completely eccentric, completely... I haven't got any pictures of the interior, but it's absolutely gorgeous. Take the whole Earthship thing or the whole Earth-sheltered thing back. Here's one that was built for under $100, £100. Really simple, really small. But again, if you look at the picture of the inside, it's beautiful. This is a bit more mainstream. This is UK, garden space. There's loads of these kind of pods around. They're really beautiful. They come in at like between 15 and 30 grand probably. And a lot of them meet building regs, and they're just totally available. But they tend to be, obviously, once they're built, so there's no flexibility. And finally, here's an unfolding prefab. So this comes flat packed, and the crane winches it up. It's very much on trend. It's A-frame construction. There's a lot of this happening, and that's what it looks like when it's finished. So it's a real pop-up house. Again, it's not designed necessarily to pop down, though presumably it would do. And again, there's so much on the TV that is supporting this movement. George Clark's Amazing Spaces, Sam Booth, who I'm working with on HUTEC, several of his designs have been featured on Clark's program. CAT do a course apparently, Build Your Own Tiny House, which apparently is completely oversubscribed. Sorry? CAT, Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales, North Wales, long-standing kind of epicentre of all things to do with homes and eco-living. If you want any more information, Misha did a course up there for a year or so. So yeah, urgent systemic problems, that's what we face. And here's a long list that I'm not going to go through, but basically from debt to a lack of time to simply enjoy life, I think very flexible small homes tick a lot of boxes, not least climate change, which is a particular issue for myself in the way that I work and the issues that I deal with. So yeah, bring it on basically. And what's going to stop us doing that? I don't think it's a technical issue. We've been trying to tackle some fierce technical issues with HUTEC, the design for disassembly, without wrecking it. Pop up, pop down is really difficult. But planning is also an issue, and I know there are a couple of planners in the room. So I just wanted to spin through some of I didn't want to get on a downer about planning, because it's there for a good reason. But there's a huge amount of inflexibility in the system, and there's a lot of very positive things happening, which I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of. So very quickly, am I okay for time at the moment? Yeah. Emma Goodwin, the Crossings, East Sussex, so it's our home turf. This is regenerative agriculture, which totally, in my view, aligns with rethinking what home is. If we think of home as the land that you're on and the house as a piece of furniture, regenerative agriculture, whatever you can do to be more productive, because everything that's happening in commercial farming, everything that's happening on the downs at scale, is probably about 8 times less efficient than what Emma's doing. Regenerative agriculture, small-scale agriculture, is way, way more productive. It gives you more food, it locks up carbon in the soil. It is the way to go. So anything with homes that we can also tie into a little bit of gardening or farming is just a complete win-win, and should be a justification for opening up land. So she's got an 8-acre smallholding, which is way too small to be a farm in planning terms, and yet there she is. She is going through a major planning challenge. That's the Crossing. So you can see a home, you can see a couple of other small buildings, you can see quite diverse gardening, agriculture happening on a small scale. That's obviously only a couple of acres of the 8 acres. But anyway, she's up at Forest Row, so it's within the county. Got to say something about the Ecological Land Cooperative. What an amazing organisation. So it's a national organisation. There seems to be a kind of super network of lots of other networks. They recently raised 300,000, I think it was on Crowdfunder or maybe on Kickstarter, but this was to enable them to challenge planning and carry on and do more. They've got one successful project in Devon. They've got 5 years temporary planning permission for super small holdings. So the idea is, it's a simple idea. On 2 or 3 acres, 3 or 4 acres, that's viable. You can create a livelihood from that land, and there's lots of people who will want to do it. The reason that they'll be successful is that they're happy to live in simpler accommodation, and they're happy to do away with a lot of the trappings of modern living and survive on, say, 15k a year instead of whatever the national average is. So they've bought 7.5 acres in East Sussex, a place called Arlington. It's in planning appeal because the planners have dragged their heels and haven't made a decision within the statutory period, so they've taken it to appeal. They've got a business plan to do like 4 or 5 more sites by 2020. They've just started another one on the Gower Peninsula. But the Arlington one is three small holdings, 3 small farms, subdivided from 7.5 acres. And they're getting support from a whole range of organisations. The Soil Association are behind them. I mean, everyone's saying this is a win-win. We've just got this old story, new story thing going on. What's that? Hey! I'm going up to Wales, actually, to this place on Thursday. So I had to put it in. I've been inspired by what these guys are doing. Wales is on a different league. They've got this thing, one Wales, one planet. And what they've basically, within that is this thing called the OPD, the One Planet Development Policy, or TAN 6, Technical Advice Note 6. What it gives you, 3rd bullet point down, the right to live in open countryside if there's a strong commitment to sustainable living. So let's just let that sink in. I mean, that's really quite extraordinary. If you drill into what the sustainable living thing means, it means what you build is going to be ultra low impact. It's going to be off-grid. It's going to deal with all the issues. You're going to be harvesting rainwater. You're going to be dealing with your own shit. You're going to be growing food, and in fact, and it's all based on ecological footprint methodology to establish the kind of norms and the benchmarks. And it runs over the monitoring is fierce. They've really, really gone to town on making sure that people don't take the piss. And you've got to meet your basic needs from land-based living. But in practice, that seems to equate with the 26 projects that are successfully up and running to about £3,000 per family or per project per annum. Amazing. Yeah, and Lammas is there's lots of these projects now. Lammas was probably the original one. I think they started about 9 years ago. They've built a community centre. They've got several different projects scattered around. They seem on the face of it. I've never been there, but I'm going there on Thursday. Super excited. And then my dad sent me, he knows what I get up to, and he sent me this last week just as I was working on the presentation. There you go. So somebody's just put up a UK planning permission laws for tiny houses in response to the housing crisis. Let's reassess them. And it's very well written, actually. And, I don't know whether that 17,000, it's probably surpassed that now. But there is no question that we do, I don't know if this is the right way to go, but we do need to look at opening up planning. So just to go back to this idea that there's a bigger picture here that we need to think about. What's innovation? We definitely need to be innovative. That's not controversial. It means to make new. It means to make changes in the current, I would say, imagined order. I think a lot of the order that we've created for ourselves in our lives and our societies is just an imagined order. It's the laws make it seem permanent and inflexible, but really it's just imagination, and a kind of everyone buys into that idea. So innovation is just making new, and I think we push a lot of what we really need to do into our shadow. Intuition and wildness. In other words, being still and listening and being true to our nature. Think back to the animals around the fire. You know, we've all got different natures, but we're all human, so we've all got common aspects of our nature. Wildness is about letting that out. So instead of trying to cover it up and be something you're not, let it out. And it allows us to create big change when we do that. And these are things that are pushed into our shadow. Wildness, if you look up definitions of wildness, they're all totally negative. It's like, got to keep that out of the room. But actually, what it is about being true to your nature. And the other thing we push into our shadow is the idea of just surrendering. It's like, okay, I can't do everything. I can't be everywhere. I'm just going to surrender to what is happening. And if we can do that, and to bring that out of our shadow, then we've got the chance to align with the bigger picture. And then it becomes, this is interesting, it's interesting for me, because I'm generally quite driven. Instead of what do I want to make happen, how can I actually try and help what is trying to emerge? How can I intuit what is trying to emerge and then play a part? Either get on and do it with others, or how can I be of service to this thing that's trying to emerge? And I think with small homes and regenerative agriculture and all these things that I've touched on, I think there's something really big trying to emerge. And it's just like, how can we all work together to make that happen?
Thank you.
Pleasure.
You say it was 5 to 10k for your design. What would be the finished cost for that, with everything included? Have you calculated that?
So we're really bootstrapping with HUTEC, in that, you know, all our effort has gone around trying to come up with a design on paper. So our financials, they'll always be underdeveloped, because it's always kind of the last thing that I tend, it's in my character to deal with that, you know, at the end. We're clear that it will be, I mean, the idea is that basically, if, you know, the design has got to the point where standard plywood sheets would go into a CNC cutter, so a computer cutter, of which there are, you know, they're all over the world. So the drawings get sent to the computer cutter. What comes out then are all those panels in different shapes, depending on what you've configured, maybe on your app. This is the HUTEC that I want, so the bits come out. Then those bits, then it's up to either an enterprise is set up locally that is then producing the panels from those bits, or you could do the entire thing yourself and save money. But what we're looking at is, you know, $1,000 or $2,000 for all the bits that you need, and then you've got to start thinking, well, what is the best insulation that I want to use? I might have salvaged a whole bunch of Celotex insulation that we can use for the panels, or I might have access to a farmer who's got sheep's wool. Whatever it is, you know, those are all decisions that can be made locally to build the actual panels, which are the modules of the HUTEC. So what I'm trying to say is, for virtually, you know, for like, let's say a couple of grand, then you've got everything that you would need to build the shell. And then you can start looking at what you can get locally in terms of glazing, what you can salvage, what you can buy in.
So the couple of grand refers to like a 1-bedroom, like how big?
It would be, I mean, what we're looking at, I mean, because it's modular, then it can be as big as you like. So what we'd be looking at is one double bed, and, you know, maybe a shower room and a kitchen living space. And then obviously it would be integrated into outside space.
Yeah, I think what we're
but
struggling
the total cost is obviously going to be way more than that, because, you know, if you then start putting in the autonomous systems and you know all of that, then it's obviously going to go up. But the idea is to keep it within the 5 to 10k mark, so it's practical for someone who's prepared to put in, you know, a fair amount of effort to produce this themselves for within that kind of arena. But remember, the nice thing is that you know, once the modules are built and you've sourced everything, then you can put it up quickly and you can take it down quickly.
Right.
So you could go in on a project where you might have to wait 5 years. Meanwhile, you've kind of been 5 years older and your kids have grown up and moved away, and your whole ballpark's changed, and you've got 12 other people whose ballparks have changed because it's taken so long to go through all the hoops to actually start building your permanent thing. So what about get the community up and running straight away?
Okay.
Francis next.
Just to add to that, what sort of living space are we thinking about with that prototype, the kitchen and the bedroom, so the shower, what sort of...
I mean, it's entirely dependent on what people need, but we're coming out, the biggest panel is going to be less than a standard 8x4 plywood sheet, because obviously to create them we've then got to cut off the edge bits to separate the two main panels. So nothing's going to be, so if you think, just roughly think of an 8x4 sheet, and then you can go, as large or small. So you could be like, 3 meters by 2, 4 meters by 2. You could be super small, or you could just go bigger.
Okay.
And you've obviously got the potential for the bed space up on the top,
Yeah.
to get the bed off.
I want to talk about foundations, because that's a substantial cost. Because
No foundations at all. It basically, I think there was a point where it was just something I was thinking about in preparing the presentation. This kind of all-terrain home. The idea is what Sam does with his homes, because he built the existing homes that he builds, all these small homes. They're really, really beautiful. They're pretty heavy, but they always go on the back of a big truck, often an articulated lorry. But they then get craned off and dropped down, and then he uses Portakabin ore. They're like kind of heavy-duty galvanised steel screw things with pads on the top and bottom. So basically, it doesn't matter. The one that he did up on the side of Ullapool, which there was a slide off, the ground was levelled, but it was pretty ropey. And so obviously all the undulations were just taken up with the positioning. So it sits on pillars, which are just super cheap. They're about £6 a piece. And every point where there's a join, and one of those goes under on a bit of paving flag. So there's no foundations.
Can you ask about water as well? Like, do you get water from the roof? Is it drainage into the roof?
Yeah, I mean,
tanks
or not. I mean, you can just run a pipe in if that's what you want to do, or the roof would definitely be designed for rainwater harvesting. But whether you would have the budget or an interest to go the whole way initially and try and get off grid for water, probably not.
What about the effluents? Do you have seepage tanks?
So all of the small homes that Sam has built so far use compost toilets. So I totally would. I mean, that's if there's a connection to mains, fine. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong at all. It's what we did in the ground house in Brighton.
Long drops.
Not long drops. No, I mean you can put it outside, or it is just literally an old-fashioned way of doing it. Or you can buy, like we did for the ground house, separate, a Finnish company. They produce this super smart plastic. It's like €1,000 or something, but it's called a separate, and it just you have to empty it every week. But there's no smell. The shit goes in a bucket. The piss goes out through a trap out to the garden, because it's like green manure. So yeah, it's super simple. There's no need for all this infrastructure. No need for it.
Julian?
Why the emphasis on top-down and temporary?
Well, because you've got to look at again, it's bigger picture stuff. There's two. I think there's two reasons. Bigger picture stuff. If I look around Brighton or any, what we've built and what we're living in is not fit for purpose. I mean, just to take one kind of anecdotal angle on that. Look around. Okay, well, there's nothing residential here, so I can't see it, but they've maybe been capped off. But if you look at anything residential, which is what we're talking about here, you'll see dozens of chimneys on each house. Okay, so all of that technology was for burning coal. The whole house, all these houses are not fit for purpose. So that's the way we've gone. So in the story that was around when they were building, that was what they thought was the best thing to do. So whatever we build now, we might think it's the best thing to do, and it's in the best place. But that could change. It would be arrogant. It's always changing. What we seem to have done is got locked into living in these dinosaur buildings that are not fit for purpose in a changing climate. So, and the weird thing is that they're worth shitloads of money. They're absolutely worthless, but they're worth shitloads of money. So, it's just there's that side to it. It's like, well, let's have some flexibility here in terms of where it is, and maybe it's not going to be appropriate to live there forever. And it's changing that mentality, rethinking home. The other one is, if it's designed for disassembly, then we can hand on. It's that whole idea of if it's on wheels, it's clearly mobile. You know, the mobile park homes. I think the only way they get around the planning law, looking at someone I believe is a planner, is that they have these little silly wheels. I mean, you know, they're not designed for moving, but they put these wheels on, and it's like they get around the planning law. So, what about we just design for disassembly, so that we're saying honestly, you know, we could move this. We could move it in a weekend. It's not set in stone.
Jonny.
Yeah, so I love the pictures, and I know what you mean about when you start looking on Pinterest for tiny houses. They're absolutely amazing. All the ones that I've seen tend to be quite sort of like sitting on freeholdings and stuff, or like sort of small holdings rather, and quite sort of rural condition. And I was wondering, in a context like this, where probably density of population is the single biggest challenge that we've got, how can this be sort of, does it have a relevance to dense conditions?
I think the density issue, going back again to the big picture, I think the density issue is an artifact. I think it is, you know, I mean, you know, the land is empty. The land is empty. Agricultural land is empty. There's nobody on it. There's nobody working it. You know, it's not what it was 100 years ago. So I think there's an illusion there.
Is it driven by transport mainly?
Yeah, there's that as well. But anyway, so there's that side to that point. The other one is that you deal with you don't deal with MeanwhileSpaces, but MeanwhileSpaces, I'm aware of. I mean, some of them, like, you know, Preston Barracks has been a MeanwhileSpace for quite a while, and it's obviously underway now. They've demolished it and they're grinding it all up into little nuggets. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but you know, there's plenty of other. I mean, I've been in Brighton 20 years. There's spaces that I know of that have been empty for that period, and there's absolutely no reason why there shouldn't have been small-scale communities living on that site, essentially caretacering the site, rehabilitating the land. You know, the big skyscraper that's all boarded up can stay there, maybe, but you know, it's just insanity in a town that's full of homelessness, and not just homelessness, but there's this thing of professional homelessness, as in no chance to do anything other than pay a landlord forever, hard-earned cash, and not really get anywhere. And that's what I'm coming across more and more. Where, you know, I had this. You know, I was kind of a bit intimidated by this woman I met at the B Corp retreat, and she was, you know, this uber kind of PR consultant, and obviously doing really well, been drafted in from Australia, you know, and she was like, wow, I really get what you're talking about. I'm never going to be able to own a house. Different kind of homelessness, but...
Erica, and then that's it, I think, then, because when we move on to the next speaker.
I just have a question about community space, because presumably the houses are very small, so you couldn't have a party or a big gathering, and so I think communities do need spaces.
What do you define by a big gathering?
Well, I don't know, a big birthday party.
How many people would you like to invite?
30, 40 people.
Okay, yeah. No, it's just that...
or a group meal, or
yeah.
a meeting.
Yeah. No, it's quite interesting because some of the again on Kirsten Dirkson's YouTube channel, there's quite a few films. It's full of films, and a lot of people touch on that. It's like, I live in this really tiny space, but actually, you know, I had 9 people round for dinner the other night, and everybody slept over. And you look at the space, and it's quite intriguing. I would just say that if we rethink home in terms of not just the box, but it's like, you know, it's all that out there, or it's just this little bit out there. Even if it's just a little bit out there, then you've actually got a lot more space, and with a cover over that space, so that you've got all weather use of it. You know, you might have to wear jumpers, but you know, you could have a gathering at your home that made use of the fact that your home was not just the box, but the slightly larger or the very much larger land that you lived on, or perhaps communally you had, you know, even more space, which would then anyone could use for their gathering, for their important rituals. Yeah. Just don't lose sight of, for example, what's happening in Wales. You know, Wales, we're still part of the United Kingdom. They have brought in policies that totally support just getting on with it, providing you make a really strong commitment.
Planning system. It's a different.
It is a different planning system.
Wales and Scotland have got totally different planning regimes.
But therein is an example of possibility.
But also, you've got the Welsh Assembly. You've got different government systems. I mean, this is the thing. We have got. We can't change our planning system just like that. The Welsh and Scottish planning systems are different because they have different sort of governance. Well, there's always been a separate planning system in Wales.
Yeah, but it's just like there's an example of somewhere that's within our country. You know, we're part of the United Kingdom, and where it's all happening.
It's a different regime. That's the thing.
And it's a different regime.
It's different governance, and I think raising expectation of changing it is,
but if we don't raise the opportunity and the aspiration to think differently and look at the bigger picture, then we'll just continue to go around within the confines that we currently go around, where we're scrabbling around, trying to, I mean, even just if it's simply enabling MeanwhileSpace to be opened up quickly for the kind of projects that are in the room.
That's in the gift of the local authority.
Exactly, yeah.
Can I, at that point, on that meanwhile use, bring Eddie in to do his presentation? Thank you, Daren.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you for inviting me along. My name's Eddie Bridgeman from MeanwhileSpace. I'm going to run you through the MeanwhileSpace journey and focus on a couple of projects and then end up with some sort of practical insights. And actually it does tie in very specifically to some of the previous presentation. But we are predominantly about commercial space. Here's some of the spaces we've got. We've got everything from old toilet blocks, railway arches, old shopping parades, brand new build pop-up housing in Lewisham, to sort of old libraries and porta cabins. Basically, we borrow space. We pay no rent to anyone, but what we do is take on all the liabilities for a space until that landlord needs it back. And what we'll try and do is either refurbish it or do as little as possible to that space to make it usable for whatever use we can find. We've got all sorts of tenants. When we started, we were very much into this kind of stuff. High street stuff when we started. Shops, this was our first one. This is the dividing line of Hackney, where this is Hoxton Street. If you go to the east side of this, it's all very fashionable and trendy. This west end of it is really pretty rough. But what we found in the early days, so this is going back to about 2009, we were providing spaces at around £20 a day for people to come and use, and it was predominantly culture and art uses for it. However, as time has developed, that has changed significantly into people trying to, where's it gone? Trying to make some sort of income from their own space. And that's really where we are still at the moment. We provide low-cost, affordable space on flexible terms for people predominantly trying to start up their own business, but sometimes they just want to generate an extra income to support whatever they do. Perhaps they've got a skill or a service they can make a few quid out of that supports the rest of their life. So we started out basically as a blog in 2009, looking at why the development process seemed to be, if you were trying to develop a large commercial scheme, you would buy a bit there, board it up, wait till you bought the next bit, and in the end you'd have this massive lump of underused space that all depended on the last building or structure being bought. We thought, well, why can't we try and get hold of that space just because it's not being used for its optimum commercial purpose? Why can't we use it for some purpose at all? We just started talking about this. As luck would have it, Hazel Blears was community secretary at the time, and there was a big panic about high streets and the demise of high streets, and she gave us a very small grant to go out and find what were the barriers to doing this. It was called the Meanwhile Project. The main barrier was landlords being scared that if they gave me your property, would I give it back? So we designed something called the Meanwhile Lease, which is a hybrid between a commercial and a residential lease. Its main feature is exemption from the 1954 Landlord and Tenant Act. Basically, we have no rights to that space, but we are a proper tenant. So we are still subject to all the pressures that come with that, and we take on all those liabilities, but we acquire no rights. That does give landlords some confidence. As it happens, we very rarely use that because most landlords are developers. If they've been around a bit, they've done this kind of thing before. This isn't a new concept, and they've got something in their drawer they'll pull out and say, here, use that. But if you flash this around, at least you look credible. It's very easy to fill in. And as time has grown, that was only a sort of a 4-month grant program. At the end of it, myself and Emily, the co-director, thought, all right, we've probably got some sort of business or social enterprise here. Let's give it a go. For about a year, we were proved wrong. But we then started to get a little bit of reputation as we took on plenty of spaces. We got that experience of getting in somewhere, making it usable, just being very sensible how we tackle an empty building. And we also developed a reputation with landlords that we would give it back. And that was the main thing. And then fast forward to now, we've got about 24 different properties. We've got about 200 individual or corporate tenants, 130,000 square foot of space, etc. We have different models of how we approach it. So either we just go and find somewhere ourselves, we're approached by a local authority or central government, or a landlord will ring us up. And that means we have to try and develop revenue out of it in different ways. We are not a grant-funded organisation. We don't get any grant. We are at the enterprise end of social enterprise, and predominantly it comes from rent from space. We put out commercial space at between 30 to 80% of market rate. And usually what we'll do is get a bigger tenant at that 80% rate, so we can fill it full of smaller tenants at the 30% rate. There are the odd grants around that we will tap into for where we've used housing. We did work with the HCA. We've done a little bit of crowdfunding, although that seemed to be more effort than it's worth. And we have raised some money through Big Issue Invest, who can't recommend enough. They're very good and easy to deal with, and obviously got a specific interest in housing as well. I talked about our first shop. So this one, from a planning perspective, this was actually a Subway store. And this was when we started to get more people who wanted to earn some money. This was the East London Furniture Company. They basically made furniture out of pallets. And the shop was too small for them and their tools. They started to bleed out into the street. And this was great for street entertainment, because there'd be chopping and sawing out there, all very anti-health and safety, I'm sure. Planners came down. Well, this is a food outlet. What are you doing here? Then we started to have a conversation with them, and this was a planner who was shopping on the street. He didn't come down in an official capacity. And he said, all right, well, I know this is in Camden. We're about 3 months behind on enforcement, and once we get hold of you, it'll be about 3 months before we even start to do anything. So you've got 6 months here before anything's going to happen, and our lease was 6 months, so we knew from that point of view, okay, that's an interesting, we know the system in Camden, we know where they stand, and for every project we've ever done since, our first thing we'll do is go to the local authority, we'll have a meeting with licensing, planning, we'll get them all in the room together, say, we are going to do this. What are the barriers to that? And that usually requires someone at quite a high level to coordinate that meeting. But you'll always get the ear of someone. You might have to hit the phone a little bit. But once you get those people in a room, explain what you're doing. They're all humans. They don't want to be difficult. They might say, well, here are the barriers we have to put in front of you. But can we talk about where the flex points are? And that's a major part of how we get things done. Because we have such short leases, we have to be quick. we can't get stuck in the planning situation. So we have to have planners on board. We will never ever do anything that's going to aggravate them, but we will push them as far as we can. And that's been forever our process. We've sort of developed, one of the things we try and do is work in clusters. This is in, if you were to stand here looking like that, you'd see Wembley Stadium. This is the Wembley High Road. And our brief from Brent Council was there's a lot of empty buildings along the edge of the stadium. The FA and Quintain have built this massive, wonderful structure and a shopping centre next to it, but it is really crap to live around here. You need a big ticket or you need to go shopping to have any sort of local experience. So can you do anything with these empty buildings? So we negotiated some access to some of this stuff. We refitted Cottrell House. It was only about 12,000 I think we spent on this, and that was basically just to strip out the ceiling and put in the furniture and make it habitable. It was freezing cold in winter, but we had some studio spaces at the end, and we discovered in Wembley there was a real ecosystem of young fashion people in the textiles business and fashion designers who had no outlet for anything, and we set up a catwalk in here, and for a whole summer we had a fashion show once every week, and in the end it started to get people from the West End coming, but that was never the purpose. It was actually trying to help sort of local designers. And similar in Loughborough Junction, where we've got a load of railway arches. These come in all sorts of standard of fit out. Normally they are a mud floor with a little bit of corrugated iron inside, some power but no toilet. We'll have people who need that kind of space. We've got florists that need storage space, carpenters who want storage space, designers who have the skills to say, all right, I can make this livable. So there are people who will deal with any kind of space you offer them. But what we converted these two that we painted into little pods where you could rent them for £25 a month, and it is literally, you get one desk like this and the equivalent space again, but it's yours on a corrugated plastic locking thing. It's your own private space, and they were being rented by mainly by women who lived in the estate that overlooks this train line, who were all servicing the local party industry one way or another. So there was some that would do, so there's a big West African community there, and they have, I think, a lot of coming of age parties or something like that. I'm not sure what the parties were for, but there's a lot of them. And there were some women who would do all the balloons. There were others who would do the seat covers, others who'd make the flowers. None of them knew each other, but they started taking these spaces on here, and then all of a sudden started swapping contacts, and their own little businesses flourished from this. So these little micro sort of clusters of business that you can sort of reveal by making local space cheap and affordable. This was our first ever serious Meanwhile project. This is the end of it. There's another 10 units going down the side of Willesden Lane. We took this on in 2011 on a 6-month lease. And we're still holding it now. We're still on a 6-month rolling break. And since then, we've spent a bit of money on it. Every year, he tries to get planning permission. You can't see it here, but all the buildings around him are 6 or 7 story. He's got this single story one. He's waiting until he'll get planning permission for it, but he keeps on putting in silly applications. But in the meantime, rather than it being dormant, we've had something like 50 businesses go in and out of those units. They all pay £500 a month, which includes all services, business rates, everything. And some can afford it. They'll stay there for a little while. Others can't, and we'll talk to them every month. If they're not managing to afford it, we'll get them out quickly. No one's going to, they haven't lost their shirt for that opportunity. Big part of our philosophy is the opportunity to fail. Have a go. We're not going to come and hunt you down if you're £200 late on your rent. We can understand that sometimes plans don't go how you hope. Blue House Yard, this is in Wood Green. So here is the view from the planner's office. So this is on Haringey Council's land. That is their old car park. They wanted something, this is now what they call a creative zone. So there's a lot of workspace around here, and this was a big empty space that they weren't using because the tube is just here, so no one drove into work. So they wanted to do something on the car park. They had a grant of 200,000 from the GLA to do it. Effectively, they're designed like fishermen's huts. They are workspace on the ground floor, and they are storage above. In that storage space, you get a desk and a PowerPoint where, should you choose to use your storage space as somewhere to work, then that is your business. And that was a concession by the planners, that we hire it out as retail space and storage space, but you can't stop people working from their storage space. And that was the concession that we got there. Now, the planners might occasionally come and tell them, stop doing that, but they're not going to enforce it for a project that's only 4 years. All those are demountable. We can take them away at the end, and indeed that's what we'll do, and put them up somewhere else in Haringey. So Rock House in Hastings, this was a mixed-use building. This is one we actually bought with other partners in Hastings. That was an old building owned by Guinness, or Diageo, who all of a sudden realised why did they have this empty building in Hastings as a part of their portfolio. They wanted to get rid of it quickly. We happened to know the agent in Hastings who was selling it. He knew that we were trying to sort of create some affordable homes in Hastings. He told us to put in an offer. We went in at, it was on the market at 310. We went in at 230,000. We secured it straight away. Large building. We refurbished it, borrowing money from Big Issue Invest. It's basically 9-storey building with 2 stories of affordable flats, 6 flats in the middle. We have capped those at an affordable rate in perpetuity. We worked out our own formula for what is affordable, and it is based on median, mid-quartile average earnings in that particular part of Hastings, and we want to ensure that rents are 25 to 40% of local earnings for that particular part, White Rock in Hastings, and we set that rent 1 year after completion, so we knew roughly the running cost of the building, and it will only ever increase at 2% plus RPI in perpetuity, and that is our approach to integrating housing into our projects. For us, it gives, if we own the building, it gives a little bit of a, it kind of gives a bit of stability to the whole thing. We've got some income coming through from the workspace side. There's always that churn. But what it also does is it creates a community. So this fella here, he is the tenant liaison officer for both commercial and residential. He makes sure that each and every tenant does something for the Rock House community one way or another, and he is the only employee that we've got there. The rest of the building is managed by the tenants, so service charge, everything like that is all managed by the tenants. That means that we have got very high electricity costs because they want to get it from green suppliers, but we've got very low cleaning costs because they mostly do all the cleaning themselves. So, you know, but they make those decisions. But what it does, it creates a community in a way that I don't think we'd have there if it was just purely workspace. So that's why we want to now try and integrate some residential into any project we can. We can't afford to do this in London, but we can outside. And that's probably it time-wise. Okay, thank you.
You were talking about the arches, I think it was
Loughborough Junction.
Loughborough Junction. And what sprung to my mind was we've got a lot of arches here in Brighton, and particularly, I know they're not closed in, but we've got a big expanse of, say, Madeira Terrace. Whether or not planning would ever consider something as innovative as using Meanwhile's space for that area in order to encourage the use of and maintain its sustainability. It's just something that popped into my head.
They're too dangerous. They can't be used. That's why they're cordoned off.
Yeah, I mean, some have that issue. Network Rail will always have an issue. They need to be able to repair them at any given point. So within 0 hours notice, they must be able to get in, and that's a feature of our lease. What we've done, we work with Arup, who are a big engineering firm, and we are in the process of a design competition to come up with ideas of how you can slide stuff in, slide a pod basically into a railway arch, not touching the outsides of it, or insides of it rather, and how we can make that affordable. So we are in that process at the moment.
That is interesting. There was another question. Sorry, someone. Oh, was it you, Sarah?
So when you were talking, I don't know what your line is on squatters, but it feels really kind of anti-squatting what you've been doing, and I don't know how you view that and politically, where we've also taken over car parking and it's kind of anti-traveller. And I don't know, where does it fit with you politically? How do you go in and say we can stop your building from being squatted?
No, they're not generally concerned about squatters. Right. They're more concerned about business rates. Is their predominant lever to get out there. We followed any squatters in? No, we usually follow guardian companies, who the property guardians, who.
So they're kind of anti-squatter, aren't they?
I don't know, but I mean the general view seems to be that if, from the local authorities that we work with, if something has had a property guardian in for too long, then actually that's an unproductive use of that space. So they approach us and say, well, if we get the property guardians out, however they'd manage that, I don't know, can you go in and make it productive? But we have no line on squatters. I mean, our non-executive director is a massive part of the squatter movement, but so I guess it gets her blessing, but it's not something that I've really ever considered. It was just not something we come across.
More questions? Emma?
With the Rock House one at the end, you bought that building.
Yeah.
So that's not a sort of temporary use. So
It's run on the same principles.
Yeah.
So all the leases for our tenants are on that get in, get out quick basis.
including the residential leases.
Yeah, the residential leases are as flexible as we can make them, but after a while the tenants fed back that actually they want a bit more security than that, so actually they've ended up being pretty normal.
But where do you get the tenants from?
We used to use a property agent, which was disastrous. We found out that they were charging the tenants to apply, and that was non-refundable. So now the tenant management company effectively take charge of the promotion process and stuff. We do work with the local authority, and we do work with one of the local mental health charities. But there is a proposal process where you have to. We will interview and meet everyone because we want to build that community and want to make sure everyone gets on and stuff, but there's no list.
Sorry, question here.
More of a comment and observation. The fisherman type buildings at Hastings,
Yeah.
They would be very in keeping with Brighton. I just wondered if the planners had any comment on that in terms of what was brought up before about Madeira. If they were pop-up, pop-down buildings, could they not be put in front of that space without safety being an issue? Sorry,
well, it's the road. I mean, the thing is, it's on the. The safety barriers are actually on the front edge of the front edge of the pavement, like the curb. So they are just they're just so unsafe. I mean, there are spaces along that
That's what
that
in the interim.
I mean, there's a planning application about to come in for the Sea Lanes Centre. So Sea Lanes projects, so that would take up some space. But there are lots of bits of land dotted about. Just as Sandra said, come and speak to us.
So the other thing is that big building up by Preston Park. Maybe, you know, that's
Anston House?
Yeah.
Anston House, well, they've got planning permission, and they are, I mean, they emailed me yesterday to say, oh, we're working on it, we're trying to get a contractor, we'll be in there soon.
But could that not be used as meanwhile?
Well, there's not much point in it.
But what Eddie's saying is your first conversation would be with the property owner.
Yeah.
That would be the initial rather than the planners.
I mean,
that's the first.
They're within months of starting.
Right.
So, you know.
Where we would look at the pop-up, pop-down housing stuff, what we're in conversations with at the moment are those large, big developers who are building, 400 homes somewhere. They phase that at 100 homes a time or something. On their last phase, which they're not going to get to for 7 or 8 years, what we're proposing is, well, if we bring in 30 or 40 pop-up homes, we will move them after 5 years onto your next site. Then that seems to me a very workable model. They will have to put in all the services and everything like that, which they will forward fund. Then, as long as we guarantee, but what I can't do is provide homes on those. I can provide temporary spaces to live, but if at the moment we start calling it homes, developers will say no, let's have the land back. So we have to, the semantics are quite important.
Total Valley.
Total Valley is one of our big development sites, one of the biggest in the city. There was
sorry,
sorry, Robin. I'll give back to you. Time for both.
Could you just, from your experience, because a lot of what you talked about was obviously commercial rather than homes, but just focusing on homes for a minute. So if we've got like a co-housing group that want to do tiny homes, Lilliput, that's what they want to do. They're here in Brighton. There are probably meanwhile spaces that would work for them. I mean, what is the balance of possibility between the owner that has maybe been sitting on it for 20 years and the council? Who could actually? I mean, can the council take the initiative? Does it always have to go through a landlord that will really have no interest?
I think it's part of my job to go and get that landlord interested.
Yeah.
So I think that what are the benefits for them where it's just easier for them to do nothing. And I think if you're working, if it is a commercial house builder, you want to sort of demonstrate that actually you can start to build that community. I mean, it depends very much on the house builder you're dealing with. I think 2 or 3 are genuinely interested in building new communities. The predominantly I just want to slap them up and sell them. But if you pick the right one, you can actually sell the community aspect to it. There's a commercial benefit to them as well, not just taking the liability for that land, but if they're putting in small bits of retail and commercial space, it starts to get people used to using that space and it starts to send some customers there. So there are some very sort of soft things you can push there. But you've got to sell it to the landlord first, then work with the local authority in tandem.
So do local authorities have any powers to force them?
Did you want to say something else?
No.
Yeah, what I was going to say was that obviously I also administer the self-build and custom house building register for the council, and we've got a number of people on that, but I've only had one person bring forward any plots or any land. So bring forward sites if you spot, or properties you spot. I can provide information if I've got any information, or there may be information in the public domain through the planning, the council's planning system, but things that maybe people wouldn't think of, but bring them forward. So I've only actually had one person actually. I mean, obviously not so much with groups because you're working on it as a separate issue. Yeah. But certainly in terms of bringing forward sites, I'll always investigate sites and see if I can find out who the owner is, for example, and then the initial discussion would be with the owner, as you say, probably because they own the land, they will decide on it ultimately.
Robin, and then
I was just wondering to what extent you initiate projects, dig them out, or to what extent people come to you?
About half and half. So we usually are. I don't know what the word is, invited or something, to one, and then if we think we can develop a cluster around, then we will actively go and get other sites around it.
Andrew?
How much of a sell do you find this it takes to the landowner? I mean, it seems that there's obviously, you touched on building that earlier. There's obviously a social kind of reward from these kind of things, but is it something you struggle with, or is it something that just makes sense to someone?
It really depends on the developer, and some are perfectly normal human beings, others are not. It really just depends on what you're dealing with, and I think you'll never get a good deal out of those which are too difficult, and we usually need a bit of money from somewhere, so what we'll try and do is say, all right, we will save you X amount of money, but you need to give us X amount to realise that, so we need some cash up front. Not a lot, but if they're too difficult, but then there might be a reason why the local authority wants something done there as well. So you can sometimes, if you can swing their power behind it, and local politicians, if they think there's a good photograph in it,
it's very inspiring. What you're doing, and see how well it ties in with the last video. You can see the two really come together with the performance.
Let's take one more question from Julie, and then that's it, I think, and we should have a tea break.
Well, it's more of a comment, and it's probably more, well, I suppose it covers everything we've been talking about. The most sustainable development is usually considered to be on brownfield sites, and the council has got, well, every council has got a brownfield site register. We had to set that up as part of last structured planning regulations. It's quite easily accessible on our website, and that is really good because it does actually give you all of the sites that we know that are available. And I mean, obviously that's something that Sandra's team have been administering, and it's a good place to start. And quite often we've got sites which have got planning permission, but they don't want to build. They want to sell it on, and so it's worth keeping an eye on the planning register. Keeping an eye, coming onto planning committee if you've got 5 hours to spare, bored. But do keep an eye on what gets planning, because there's a lot of sites where we know they're just land bank, and it's always good to use those as a resource, and that's a general comment for everybody, not just your Meanwhile users, which I think is great.
Thank you, Eddie. Then tea break, and then Jonny.
Hi everybody. I've met a few of you before, so some of you will have seen some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, so apologies if it's repetitive from last time we met. I'm going to be talking about Marmalade Lane in Cambridge. It's an example of community-led housing. It's a co-housing scheme. It does some things well, it does some things less well, and I think it's not a template that you could just replicate for every other situation, but hopefully it offers a few lessons and insights. And Andrea's asked me to kind of focus in particular on some of the planning challenges that we've faced in bringing it forward, things that would sort of start a conversation about how planning can work to be more responsive to community-led housing elsewhere. Just to start with who we are, that's just to prove that I'm sometimes to be found on a building site, although as you can see from the colour of my coat it's very clean, and I generally tend to be at my desk working my computer, and that's my co-founder Neil Murphy. The reason why we set up is just a kind of broad set of needs and opportunities that we perceive in the UK. We all know about the housing crisis. It's well documented and pretty much incontestable. Across the UK, houses cost 7 times incomes. In Brighton, it's 15 times, I think. And just to keep up with new demand, we're told we need to build 200,000 homes annually. And that's without even kind of doing what we have to do to kind of make inroads into demand that's built up so far. Meanwhile, the Barretts and Taylor Wimpeys and Persimmons of the world building this sort of product that even if you have enough money to purchase, most people don't want to. So there's a massive disconnect between what people want from their homes and what the new build kind of industry is actually offering. We also know that old homes are kind of perceived to offer greater character and a greater sense of community. They're built around more established streets. They've got all those advantages. But let's face it, they're They're drafty, overpriced, and difficult to maintain. There's not that many of them, and nobody's building old homes anymore, for obvious reasons. We're many of us looking to self-build to be the answer, but everyone in this room probably knows what the challenges are of finding land and making that work for self-build. It's super difficult, and however much Grand Designs makes us aspire to it, it just isn't something that all of us can readily do. So we basically built Town around the idea of bringing those drivers of the market together, which is basically taking the best of new build, taking the best of the self-build aspects of choice and giving customers control, and the best bits of period housing by building in proper streets and tall high ceilings, good daylighting, those things that old houses do well, and to kind of bring that into a package that is relevant for customers and people. Underpinning our approach is a bunch of kind of principles. Our background was in kind of large-scale planning projects, so we're very much about building towns, hence the name of our company. We believe in walkable neighbourhoods where within 5 minutes walk of your home you can buy a pint of milk, get a pint of beer, and take your kids to school. Infrastructure to kind of connect you to everything you need, whether that's virtually through internet and kind of virtual connections, or whether it's through transport. We believe that if people had the choice, they would prefer to walk and cycle over driving. It's just that the way we've planned places in the last 50 or 60 years means that it's very difficult sometimes to do without one's car. We believe in smart density, which basically means that, in terms of arithmetic, we need to be sustaining a certain number of households within certain geographical areas in order to sustain the amenities and facilities that everybody needs to use. That doesn't necessarily mean building tall and kind of, skyscrapers. Actually, efficient density can be at 2 or 3 stories very readily. We believe in streets and squares to punctuate urban settlements and make them more interesting. And coupled with that, we think that kind of places should be full of opportunities to plant food, for kids to play, and remembering that we're not alone in this world and we've got nature to live next to, and actually our places should be much more dominated by nature than they are at the moment. I've mentioned amenity and I've mentioned sense of place. Those are broadly the kind of values that we cleave to in our approach. Now, we partnered with Trivselhus, which is a timber growing cooperative in Sweden. It has around 50,000 farmer members who all grow slow growing pine trees, and who together have a cooperative which looks to sell timber to the Swedish and international markets. It purchased a company that's called Sodra. It purchased a company called Trivselhus, which is a manufacturer of panelised systems for building houses, just basically as a way of getting its timber to the market. Now, it's a very good system. It's all factory built. It starts with the window. So rather than having windows fitted at a later date, which kind of leads to compromises around airtightness and so on, it starts with the window in the factory and then wraps a panel around them. It's a very simple structural panel, fully insulated, and it comes with the utilities ducts all in. And basically, when the panel is completed, it gets shipped to people like us and then erected on site. And it means that you have various advantages. This is the kind of cut through of the panel. You have various advantages because out of the box it performs at quite close to passive house standard. It can be made into passive house with an appropriate design, but it's already very high performing kind of regardless. Obviously it's got triple glazed windows. But also it's very quick to build, so once on site we can build houses about 2 to 3 units per week at the peak during this project. So coming to the project itself, the first thing I would say is a massive kind of number of parties involved, and that's really one of the things that has made it a really special project. There's us, obviously, Town and Trivselhus that I've mentioned. There's Cambridge K1, which is the name of the co-housing community that we're working with. Cambridge City Council in the top right are the landowners. And bizarrely, or making it a little more complex, South Cambridgeshire District Council is the planning authority, different from Cambridge City Council being the landowner. So the location of the site is on the northern edge of Cambridge, and it's part of an urban extension called Orchard Park, which was basically a substantially sized new quarter of Cambridge that was built through the early 2000s. And this is called Parcel K1, which was one of the last remaining bits of that development to be brought forward. And as I said, it was owned by Cambridge City Council. Now, in 2008, it was going to sell the land to a private developer, a house builder, but the market conditions at that time meant that that transaction fell through. So Cambridge City Council, rather than just kind of holding it and waiting for the market to recover, which maybe they should have done because this has actually taken a lot longer, thought that a quicker and smarter and more interesting way of approaching this would be to look at a different way of bringing the site forward. And they were advised by somebody called Stephen Hill, who spoke here recently as part of our launch event, and he advised them to kind of look at a co-housing solution. They were comfortable with this as long as it delivered certain outcomes, including, critically, a land receipt. So what Cambridge City Council wasn't in the business of doing was giving the land away to enable development. It wanted to sell the land for a reasonable price, generate a land receipt, but at the same time, in doing so, to achieve something that'd be more innovative, more about community, more a better layout, and something that would kind of show that that it can and that it's at the forefront of kind of community-led housing. And so it settled on what it called an enabled co-housing scheme, where it basically said, this is going to be a co-housing scheme, this is the co-housing group, but we want an enabling partner, a developer, to sit alongside the group and actually bring it forward for them, working alongside them. So that's who we are. That's the role that we've taken on. And it was I should just sort of say that the way that it disposed of its land, or the way that Cambridge City Council took its land to market, was a competitive process. It went to the market and said, we're looking for a developer to work with the co-housing group. It invited bids from the general open market. We put in a bid. We were shortlisted. There were 3 parties bidding at shortlisted stage, and we won on the basis of 60% was down to the land value that we offered to the council, and 40% was down to the quality of the bid and the design. So Andrew, as I said, asked me to kind of just look at the project through the prism of like working out what some of the challenges were, both for us and our partners and our planning partners. So challenge number 1 is an obvious one. Here we have residents who are at the heart of the process. Now, this is not the way that the building industry usually works. The way that house builders usually works is that they're very comfortably removed from anyone who's actually ever going to live in one of their houses. So by the time you actually live in a house, it's too late to actually make any choices about it, and it's definitely too late to make fundamental choices about the way it's laid out. If you're very lucky, you might be able to get hold of somebody on the snagging helpline to come and sort of put something right when it's leaking or when something's broken down. But the idea that developers and customers, residents actually work together is fundamentally a different idea, and actually it's very, very challenging in lots of ways and very exciting, and this is why we went into it. But I should say you shouldn't underestimate how fundamentally challenging that is, not just to developers but also to the wider network of kind of professional people who make these things work. Nobody is used to working alongside residents. Now, we worked with a very good team led by Mole Architects. Now, I guess they're in a way the exception because they're a very small practice, so they work with one-off customers quite a bit. And they also do a few kind of larger housing schemes. So I suppose that we brought together those two sort of sets of expertise, the idea that they work with people who are actually going to live in their houses, but they also understand that doing a larger scheme of 30, 40 houses actually has kind of a programme which is rather different from just bringing forward an individual house one at a time. But it also means that there's a fundamentally different dynamic with the planning offices. So often we were talking to planning offices at the council and saying, this isn't necessarily something that we think is the only way of doing it, but we have kind of 20, 30 households who want it done in this way. And that's quite difficult for planning officers to kind of hear sometimes because, they're quite understandably thinking about it from all sorts of other different perspectives. But the idea that something can be put forward just because it's the will of the people who are going to be living there is a new idea for a lot of planners and an interesting one. And it also needs a different process, and this is the way that we kind of crudely set up a process with the group to enable decent collaboration. And we really did it just by kind of breaking the project down into a series of chunks, thematic sort of work streams, where we matched our professional team up with the people who are going to be living there, and we just got them into the same room, one theme at a time, and just workshopped. And we did that multiple times, and it wasn't always very easy, but everyone was kind of honest in sort of trying to work out what the answer was. And not everyone agreed all the time, but we sort of got through it. Challenge number 2, co-housing. It's all about, and I think other forms of community-led housing, are all about this kind of reimagining the difference between public space and private space. Now, in normal house builder wisdom, private space is valuable and public space is valueless, and that's why if you go to any new build housing estate, the space that's left over after the estate has been built is usually pretty rubbish. And there's an acronym called SLOPE, space left over after planning, and it's just rubbish, isn't it? It doesn't, it's not perceived to have any value. And similarly, if you look at a house builder's brochure, you'll just see photographs of kind of the kitchen, like the kitchen worktop, or the kitchen, like a kettle on the kitchen worktop, because that's perceived to be the thing that customers are kind of going to be into. I don't understand that. I don't understand how they think that customers are so dense to think that a picture of a flower, a sort of kind of vase of flowers on a worktop is going to drive value. But I'm much more interested in the things that are kind of around the house. And I think that all of the evidence around the houses that are worth the most in this country supports the idea that it's about amenities, it's about streets, it's about the things that aren't actually in your home that people value the most of all. It's about the street and the people who you're with and the opportunities there are to kind of get around easily and the amenities and facilities on your doorstep. Here's a very wise quote from the Marmalade Lane sales brochure. I think Julian drew this, but it's become a really important diagram to show how this kind of what makes co-housing different in terms of this kind of relationship between public and private space. It's just fundamentally a more sociable way of laying out a place. Front doors are kind of made to front onto shared areas, so that the idea being that people will naturally get to know their neighbours and will have spaces to bump into one another, and just to engender something that's more than just a kind of solitary existence. At the heart of this diagram is a massive green space, the idea being that at the heart of the scheme would be a place for kids to play and for people to gather and to enjoy themselves and maybe to plant food and all the rest of it. It includes a common house, which, for those of you who don't know, is just an additional piece of inside space where people can get together and eat, maybe once a week or maybe more often, depending on how much they want to. It might have some other facilities like kids' play areas, some guest bedrooms that they can book for when people are coming to stay over. It might include some additional storage, meeting spaces. But the idea being basically that people don't have to kind of carry all that additional space in their home because they don't need to use it very often. So why not just have it in a common house that you can share it with other people and just make it much more cheap and easy to run and cut down on the size of private space that you need. So again, all of this is totally antithetical to house builder wisdom, which is all about privatising space. This is the layout of our scheme, and it's actually a kind of pretty literal representation of Julian's drawing. It has a very large central garden. It has a lane running through it, which is fronted on both sides and by active sort of house frontages. And it has a common house of reasonable size, kind of right at the heart of the scheme, which fronts the lane, acts as a gateway to the whole scheme, and backs onto the common garden. This is an artist's impression of our common house, which is now pretty much built, and a list of the facilities that we've got, I think most of which I've mentioned, other than the fact that it's also got a workshop for people to do hobbies and things, and to kind of store stuff relating to those hobbies that you just wouldn't want to necessarily keep in your own home. And this again is a picture of the shared garden. Our idea around the shared garden was just to make sure that it worked really, really hard in terms of the space that it was offering. So making sure that no individual parts of the garden were just doing one thing. So if there's a place for relaxation, it might also be a place for nature. Or if there's a place for children to play, it could also be a place for adults to hang out at other times. And it's just trying to kind of think through space from lots of different angles to make it more useful to more people and things at different parts of the day. So in a nutshell, this approach means far more emphasis on shared space. It means I've put it slightly smaller dwellings and gardens, because in the context of today, our dwellings aren't super small. They could be smaller. And as I said, this is totally unfamiliar territory for all of the kind of people who are used to dealing with suburban development. Challenge number three, rethinking the place of the private car. This is always the one that's the most difficult in any scheme that we've come across. So South Cambridgeshire planning policy required two private spaces per dwelling plus visitor parking. And just to give you an idea, what we've settled with here is one space per dwelling plus visitor parking. So that's 40 dwellings or so, plus 10 visitor spaces. That's 50 spaces in total in this diagram. And what we would have had to put in place if we were going to be policy compliant would have been 90. So it gives you an idea of how much of that central area that's now given over to shared green space would have actually been taken up by car parking if we'd been purely policy compliant. But it's difficult for planning policy officers to move away from policy because it's always there for a good reason or for a reason, you know. So what was interesting about this was that actually we did have the actual people who are going to be living in the scheme. We were able to say, look, you know, this is how many cars they actually own. This is how committed they are to car sharing. You know, it was one of those interesting examples of, it was a very difficult argument to argue against because we were actually showing the people who were going to be there. Now, in the end, we had to put mechanisms in so that there's a review mechanism so that if it doesn't work in the future, we'll be made to put in more parking spaces or the group will. So everyone is in the end happy and the planners aren't giving over some, you know, they're not making a bad decision. But the point is that it's a difficult thing and it's a really important thing because it's so fundamental to the amount of space that you give to different functions. If you can reduce the amount that's given over to cars, then you're onto a good thing. Challenge number 4 is driving diversity. Now, most new housing estates, especially in suburban locations, don't really do diversity, and they often don't really do density either. They don't do diversity because it's just easier for house builders to build the same type over and over and over again. So if you go to an estate, it will just be a mix of 2 or 3 or 3 and 4 bedroom homes, and it won't really do much more than that. It will just be one house type or 2 house types, just distributed one after another, after another. With a group like this, which is a diverse intergenerational co-housing group, it's actually much more complex and people's requirements are much more textured and there is so much difference between people. So you've got some larger families with kids, you've got some downsizing couples, you've got some singles living alone, you've got couples who don't have kids now but who might like to in the future, and they've all got totally different needs. So that calls for a much more diverse approach. The way that we handled it, because we were trying to do it in a way that was efficient and kind of replicable and wasn't going to drive our design team crazy, was basically to kind of come up with a system that comprised 4 different house types, imaginatively called A, B, C and D, which incidentally is better than calling it the Willow or the all those kind of horrible, the Winchester or the Marlow and so on and so on. So we just shy away from calling our houses anything, it's just safer. But basically they're 4 different house types. They're mainly terraced houses. It's a narrower house, a wider house, an even wider one which happens to have 2 front doors, which is a flat on the ground floor and a flat on the upper floor, but each with their own private front door, and then an apartment building serviced by a lift, which is more, you know, more purpose-built, as it were. And within those, we offered people a menu so that they could actually take their house shell and then make it different internally depending on what their own requirements are. So they could have a ground floor and the first floor, those were obligatory, but they didn't have to have a second floor. They could just have a space as a storage loft. But if they did want to have a second floor, they could put 1 bedroom in, or a bedroom with an ensuite, or a bedroom with a roof terrace. On the first floor, they could have 2 or 3 bedrooms depending on what their own needs were. If they didn't have a second floor, it meant that they could put one in later, just like, you know, with an old-fashioned house, but it would be much easier to do because the insulation would be in the pitch of the roof rather than below. So actually, it would be as simple as putting in a roof window. So in that way, it means that this house could be anything from an 89 square metre 2-bedroom house all the way through to a 125 square metre 5-bedroom house, but walking down the street, you wouldn't really know which one was which. And the important thing was that because they're all the same depth, they can all be kind of put in any order down the street. So again, you would just sort of look down the street and it would look kind of coherent and quite sort of democratic. But inside, because of those flats and the difference between all those different unit types, you know, one front door might lead to a 50 square metre house and another one might lead to a very large 5-bedroom house, but you wouldn't really be too aware of that. Yeah. So there they are. Just in terms of how it comes out in terms of calculations, 42 dwellings per hectare is our gross figure, and it's about 60 dwellings per hectare if you take our net developable area, which is taking out that shared bit of garden in the middle. Now, that is much higher than the house builders would be usually delivering at, but it doesn't feel like a particularly over-dense scheme. What you, yeah? Really low, 60 dwellings per...
42, yeah. Always go by gross.
Yeah. But it's, you know, most, that's it. Definitely, I think it's in terms of a number of square feet, it's pretty over a kind of suburban. This is a suburban context. It's quite a lot higher. And actually, because of the fact that a lot of it is given over to quite a large shared garden, if you were to adjust that, the dwellings, the densities could be, could be quite a bit higher still. Challenge number 5 in terms of planning, we wanted to give a lot of choice to our residents, including kind of internal configuration that I've mentioned, but also some external configuration options. And so they were able to choose between different brick colours that would, change the appearance of their house in the context of the scheme, but without making it look like a dog's breakfast. And so they basically people had a choice between 4 different brick colours. All of them were going to look fine in any order. That was the idea anyway. So we had the conversation with the planners and sort of said, if we were to carry on offering choice to new customers as they come along, is it okay for us to do that as long as they stick to this palette? And the planners said, yeah, that's perfectly feasible, but we want to see every single kind of possibility illustrated. We worked out there are about sort of 4 billion different possibilities because of the kind of so we just couldn't illustrate them all. So in the end, it was a shame. We had to kind of make the choices that we could with the residents that we had on board at that time, and for the other ones, we had to make choices for them. But different planning officers, different places, could take a different view on it, and it's one of those quite interesting things. So I won't go through that because I think that's pretty much what was said. And then finally, that's just how it's worked out in practice, that kind of combination of the 4 brick types. So those were based on real customers making those choices, not rigged. And then the final challenge was thinking beyond statutory affordability requirements. And I'm very honest about the fact that this is an open market scheme. The affordable provision had already been delivered on the sites next door. So this isn't the best example for a kind of blended sort of affordable scheme that many of you would like it to be from a CLH perspective. But what I would say is this, is that we took an outline market consent for 36 dwellings. Through planning, we increased it to 42. That meant that we only had a statutory affordability requirement of 2 units, which we then delivered. However, we took a view that throughout the rest of the scheme, because of the fact that there was a co-housing group on board, and that in a way de-risked it from our point of view, because they were known to us and we could see that they wanted to live there, that we were able to kind of, persuade our investors that the margin that would normally be applicable to market housing could be lower. And actually that made a bit of a difference. It meant that we could actually trim the investor margin by about £1 million across the whole scheme, which was then awarded to people depending on how long they'd been involved and what role they played in the co-housing group. It was a slightly arbitrary sort of system of awarding discounts. We'd probably done it differently if we had our time over again. But nonetheless, the point was that we gave some pretty chunky discounts of up to about 10%. Now, that doesn't sound like very much when you're comparing it to affordable housing, but in the context of a market scheme, there's no other scheme that you can think of that would just do that for market housing, for pure open market housing. So actually, if we can do that on a market scheme, then once you start looking at it across a kind of proper complete scheme where you're actually dealing with the when you're dealing with the affordable component as well, then we should be looking at something much more interesting. And I should just add that we did some sort of self-finishing options, with the idea being that if people wanted to kind of come in with a very, very rudimentary kitchen sink rather than having a whole kitchen, they could, and then they can kind of fit their kitchen out themselves to do it more affordably or to their taste. Just a picture of the scheme as it is today from the shared garden. It's obviously not complete, but hopefully it gives you a bit of insight as to what we've been up to. Thank you.